Hello, Conan O'Brien here. All last week, I used my morsel of television to hear Black voices as we struggle with this intense period of racial anguish and upheaval. I'd like to continue that tonight. Earlier today, I spoke with the mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, Mayor Melvin Carter. He is at the epicenter of this national crisis, and he has a unique perspective. So without any delay, let's get started. While George Floyd may be the most notable African-American to have died at the hands of Minnesota police, he was not the first. In 2018, tonight's guest was elected the first African-American mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, 2 years after the Philando Castile shooting in the neighboring suburb of St. Anthony. He's a fourth-generation resident of St. Paul and the son of a former St. Paul police officer. I'm very honored to welcome Mayor Melvin Carter. Mayor, thank you for being here. I know you're busy. This means a lot to us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
You know, we'll start for me to ask you personally how you're doing. You, your family, everyone doing okay during these insane times?
You know, that's a super loaded question these days. And I think some of it depends on what you mean. And some of it depends on what the day is. We have a pretty big family. We've got a crew of children in and out of the house who are, been trying to social distance learning at home.
Right.
That's been fun as it has been for everybody else. We've got a 3-month-old at home.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. You have a 3-month-old. So in the midst of this incredible turmoil, not just COVID, but all of the unrest and anguish of the past week and a half, you have a 3-month-old.
That's right.
And so I just want to say you're welcome to come stay with me.
Yeah, right. I appreciate that. She, try as I might, she doesn't have the proper appreciation yet for the term mayor. I try to convince her that one day this will mean a lot to you. So let me get some sleep, but no, it doesn't work.
You're not getting the respect you should. Well, let me start because you, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you, and I am so appreciative that you could make the time for us, is that you're kind of, because you're the mayor of St. Paul and also the son of a police officer, and you are at the nexus of so many points right now. You are
right.
And your point of view, I think, is incredibly valuable, obviously. And so I wanted to start by talking to you. I mentioned it up front, the Philando Castile shooting several years ago, which was another horrific incident, which was caught on video, witnessed by a lot of people. You had a personal connection to that incident. I know it happened in a neighboring jurisdiction, just outside St. Paul.
That's right.
You knew Philando Castile, is that true?
Not well. I would see him around community. He graduated from my same high school, a year away from my younger sister, a year ahead of my younger sister. The school he worked at was the school that my children went to kindergarten in. And so he was around community. I would see him at the coffee shop and I would see him around community a bit, but didn't know him well. But of course, it's really traumatic for our entire community for something like that to play out. And while the rest of the world was kind of battling with this major kind of socio-political thing, we were locally explaining to our children what happened to Mr. Phil. So it was traumatic on a bunch of levels.
Right. It was a person in your community that you knew, and
that's right.
And now that event, obviously very traumatic and got a lot of attention. But George Floyd seems to obviously has blown this wide open and been just an incredibly wrenching moment for a lot of Americans. Probably exposing a lot of us to a reality that we were not aware of, but you grew up in this reality. You grew up, your father was on the police force, but also you had, I'm guessing, interactions of your own with maybe being pulled over or
definitely
treated differently because of the color of your skin.
Yeah, without a doubt, to the video of George Floyd, I mean, unfortunately, we've had this conversation for years now, which is like, how bad does a video have to be? How egregious does it have to be? How obvious does it have to be? for us to say, okay, wait, that's enough. Somebody's got to be held accountable for this. And we said that after Philando Castile was killed, and like, okay, this clearly, like, for it to be this obvious, it's clearly somebody has to be held accountable. And then we saw that officer acquitted. And so it seems that with each video, it keeps sort of testing the limits of just how much that somebody can get away with regard to taking a Black life or a brown life. Yes, I've had lots of experiences, frankly, good and bad, right? I have the privilege, it's a level of privilege to grow up with my dad being a police officer, because I had this, my first car was a 1984 two-tone gray Monte Carlo, right? It was very sweet in a way that like only 17-year-old boys can like truly appreciate.
Yes.
Right. And so I'd get pulled over all the time, right? And when I got pulled over, they'd run my plates and they'd run to my father, who was in internal affairs at the time, and I would get let go with like a warning, right? But you're right, like part of my truth is you shouldn't have to be a police officer's son. You shouldn't have to be a college student or a city council member or somebody special to be treated with basic dignity. I think Van Jones said it really well in your conversation with him, is that like the trauma, the violence of that George Floyd video is that it cracks all of the remaining solace that we take in those conversations that we have with our children about, if you just behave, if you just like do everything that they say, if you just don't resist, then you'll be able to kind of walk out of that conversation safely. He did all of those things. And I'll tell you maybe the most heartbreaking part about that video is the paradox that he didn't even like fight to try to fight and to struggle for his last breath. But like we all know that if he had, that struggle would have been used as the excuse to cover up the fact that he was killed in the way that he was.
Now we're at this national moment today, very much the conversation over the weekend and last night, many demonstrations have been about the police. And I'm sure you have very strong opinions. There's people out there that there's a big movement to defund the police. And I would imagine that, like many things, it's complicated. It's probably a very complicated question when you hear about defunding the police. There are many people, including myself, who don't really know what that means.
Sure. I'll tell you what I think is not complicated is the fact that we've bought into this notion, this myth, that public safety is just as simple as police, prisons, and prosecutors, right? And every time we feel uncomfortable, or every time we feel unsafe as a nation, we can find billions of dollars to double down on police, prisons, and prosecutors, yet it hasn't worked. We still don't feel safe, And one of the truths I think we have to grapple with is the reason we don't all feel safe, Conan, is because that public safety framework, that model really isn't designed to make us all feel safe. It's designed to like draw a circle and protect or insulate the people inside the circle from the people outside of the circle at all costs. It creates a level of resentment from the people who feel like they're outside of the circle. It definitely creates a level of a feeling of being threatened by the people inside the circle because it's clearly a tenuous balance. And then we drop our police officers right in this epicenter of all of that in a way that, community members are going to look at them as, you're the force that's kind of here to keep me out of the greater prosperity of kind of the broader community. And so as we talk to our police officers, and we hear them say all the time, we don't have the capacity or the expertise to be, the social workers, the mental health counselors, or the grief counselors, or the drug counselors, or, all of those different things that we all know would help in community. And so, one thing I think is very clear is, if we just approach public safety with like this police-only perspective that we have for so long, to me, that's like approaching public health with an ambulance-only perspective, right? Like we know how ridiculous that would be to just chase problems after it happens. We have to start investing in families and in neighborhoods to try to reduce the likelihood that something bad is going to happen in the first place. So it starts with, if we hear our police officers saying, well, we can't be the mental health counselors and the social workers and the drug counselors, all of those things they're taking orders. Like those are things that we're clearly identifying a need for. So we ought to invest in those things. We know, Conan, I'm guessing you live in a safe neighborhood, right?
I do. Yeah.
And I would guess that in your neighborhood, you have strong schools. I would guess that folks have access to really good jobs. I would guess that, folks have the ability to kind of make their money work for them and kind of just and live a quality life. And so if we're just investing money to hire people to chase problems after they happen, then that's the opposite of investing to transform our most challenged neighborhoods into those neighborhoods that have the kind of social capital that your neighborhoods have. And that's, I think, at the core what people are asking for.
It feels to me, because I'm familiar, that you do want more community involvement. And it sounds to me, and it makes a lot of sense, that you're advocating a more nuanced approach, meaning it's not just police, you take care of everything. It's trying to figure out what situations should we not be sending the police in to handle, but be sending someone else in to handle. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Like any gun safety instructor or any police officer would tell you that even if you're like a good guy with good intentions, just introducing a firearm into a situation inherently makes that situation dangerous, right? And so when people have a mental health crisis, there's a number of reasons people call 911. Sometimes it's because I'm being robbed and I need an officer to show up. Sometimes it's because I'm in crisis. Sometimes it's because I just need help with something. And we need to figure out how to bring different levels of resource to kind of meet those needs. That's something that we're doing, I think, very well in St. Paul. We have a chief, Conan, who is constantly focused on what he calls making deposits in our bank of trust with our community members. I hear him ask our officers after anything happens 3 questions. Were your actions reasonable? Were they necessary? And were they done with respect? And if you can answer yes to all 3 of those questions, then you're probably going to have a relatively quick, short conversation with our chief. If you can't answer yes to those questions, reasonable, necessary, and respectful, then you're going to have a longer conversation with our chief. We've engaged community members in the process of defining what public safety means for us and what those types of investments are. And we're actually already walking down that road. We have actually already launched a public health, mental health co-responder model, where we have social workers trained in mental health who are literally in the police car riding along with police officers to respond to some of those issues that we know won't be solved by just showing up and arresting somebody, but needs a longer term approach. We're doing that work, and we want to do more of it. And I think it's important to see the rest of the countries do some of that as well.
It's hard for me, because of what you said, not to remember that the reason Philando Castile was killed, unnecessarily, shockingly killed, was that all he did was tell the officer, I do have a weapon in the car and I'm licensed to carry. And he was saying that to create more safety and to be responsible. Tragically, the officer said, you're holding a gun, don't bring out the gun. And he wasn't and didn't, but ended up getting shot. That introducing police and people with weapons into every situation obviously can make that situation instantaneously 1,000 times more dangerous and volatile. And so the idea that you could have different types of people responding in different levels of need makes a lot of sense. I know that this leads into an initiative called 8 Can't Wait. And there's so much of it. I read through the 8 Can't Wait program, and obviously there's things in there that say, well, listen, no more use of chokeholds, no more clamping down on an airway or the carotid, because that is so dangerous and can go so wrong so quickly. But then there's so many other initiatives in there that, once I read them, made intuitive sense, which was about creating distance, creating a bunch of parameters that would make the situation much safer. Can you talk about some of those initiatives from 8 Can't Wait?
Yeah, without a doubt. The first thing you said, Conan, I think brought together a number of the things that we're talking about in that, Philando Castile just being himself and having a firearm, even though it was in his pocket and put away, and he's like talking about it directly to let the officer know that it was there out of courtesy, that just being himself was a threat. That officer considered him a threat, just sitting there being himself. And therein lies, I think, a big part of the problem is if the standard by which we determine whether somebody can be held accountable for taking a life is whether you feel threatened or not. And if my very existence, if my oxygen makes you feel threatened, well, then it's easy to see why people all across this country say, wait a minute, but we have to assert the value of Black lives in a different way. That's really critical. My father was a St. Paul police officer. You mentioned that. He served almost 3 decades. And I would see him just go through our community solving problems, right? And identifying problems that if you're not from our neighborhood, you probably wouldn't even know was a problem, in the first place. And so he was able to serve our community in ways that other officers just could not, that nobody else really could, because he's from here, because he grew up here. He was raising his children here. He goes to the grocery store. He goes to church here, and he's like interwoven as a part of the community. And so we have, and I always hear my father say, he goes, when you're that much a part of the community, when somebody's kids go to school with your kids, or you grew up with their parents, or you're that interwoven together, instead of looking for justifiable reasons to use deadly force, you can find an unlimited number of reasons not to use deadly force, not to shoot somebody, not to kill somebody. So we've signed up for this 8 Can't Wait campaign, and it's about rewriting our use of force policies. The truth is, we did that when we first came into office. Unfortunately, I think the saddest thing about George Floyd's murder is how historically unsurprising it is. We've been on this road for quite some time, and we are where we've gotten as a result of kind of where the road that we've been on. And so, this was a priority of mine when we first came into office. I think in the first 2-3 months in office, we had a 2-month public engagement process to engage our community in what our use of force policies should be. I don't know of, I don't know of any police department, any agency on the planet before us, frankly, that has engaged community members to say, like, let's come up with an agreement. What's our compact on what our use of force policies should be around for our police officers? The final policy that we passed 2 years ago includes dozens, I think a couple dozen of suggestions that we got straight from community members. And I think that's really important. So the truth is, with that 8 Can't Wait campaign, most of those things are things that we actually already implemented 2 years ago. We wanted to make sure that there was an explicit, that we explicitly addressed two of the items that the campaign kind of identified as not specifically addressed in our policy. So our chief did a fantastic job, got that turned around. I think within 24 hours of realizing that they had alerted us to this challenge. But in the end, our policy, which I think is very important, it does a number of things. It establishes that duty to de-escalate a situation. It establishes the duty to intervene that we've all talked about and seen on display as necessary in the past week. It changes from where we always talk about reasonable force. It directs our officers to utilize the minimum amount of force necessary, the minimum amount of force, both reasonable and necessary. So not just reasonable. The question is, was it necessary in that situation? And I think pretty intriguingly, it distinguishes between how officers respond to people who are being sort of, passively resistant, right? Just saying, I'm not going to get up when you say get up, versus people who are being aggressive toward an officer or toward another human being. The way we respond to them has to be fundamentally different.
It feels to me that there's a lot of this, sadly, that is, it's kind of common sense. I mean, you and I are both human beings. I've been in the world a lot longer than you, but I know, just being on this planet, that when you treat someone like an other, you are going to get that same feeling back. You get to know people when you talk to them, when you ask them how you're doing and you show any amount of empathy. You are creating a contract, a social contract. And these are things that we all know, but I think it's something in our wiring we can forget it, or we can drift away from it. So obviously when an officer is being sent into a situation where, for whatever reason, he feels threatened or is tense or something, he might flip over. There's that circuit that flips over into this person is the other, rather than seeing it as this is someone I may know, someone from my community who I've had experience with because I've been a part of the community. I think that's where the notion that you've been talking about to use community policing more, and I want to use that word carefully because obviously police officers have to be highly, highly trained, but make sure that the community is involved in keeping their community safe, and that they have some of the power and experience to do that.
I think there's no other way around that. My father wrote a book about growing up, and I don't want to spoil it for you, Conan, because I'm sure you've got it on your list. But
I will have it on my list. Yeah, I will.
That's right. That's right. There's a part of it where he talks about when he was 25 and two of his closest cousins and like best friends in life were murdered in a double homicide. And they were his closest friends. They had grown up together, and somewhere along the way, they had taken a pact that if somebody kills you, I'll kill them, right? And it's kind of this situation where the whole neighborhood, assumes my father is going to go after this guy. And he ends up getting acquitted for the killing and disappears right after it. And my father found out years later, probably decades later, that my grandfather had approached the suspect's mother and had paid for him to have a train ticket or a bus ticket out of town. And that's an example, I think, of community working together, right? Of community identifying a problem, community kind of stepping in and saying, this could go wrong in a way that's bad for all of us. And let's work together to create like community level solutions. So that's one of the things that we're investing in as well. And there's a number of communities around the country and around the world who are having success with hiring community members, hiring neighbors as like interveners and interrupters to identify kind of these kind of things that could go really bad in community, and figure out how, based on community resources, using community, the language of community, how to interrupt and help prevent violence from happening in the first place. And I think that's the core of what many of us are saying, right? Instead of this public safety strategy, instead of this kind of framework and toolbox that all waits to start until after a crime has been committed.
Right.
How do we invest proactively in our neighbors? How do we invest proactively in our neighborhood areas? How do we invest proactively in our families and our children in such a way that makes people less likely to have to act out in desperation? It's really
it's preventative health versus
that's what it is.
Versus chemotherapy, and I think that's what I'm hoping this movement, this turmoil and this anguish and this activism leads to, is a sense that everybody knows you don't want to wait to the stage where you're getting chemotherapy. You want to take care of yourself, and we want to take care of our community and the people in our community.
That's right.
They all feel invested. So
that's right. And what I would say, Conan, is like right now we have the language for it, because as we know well, we're in like 4 different crises at the same time right now. We have the pandemic, the physical health portion of it. We have the economic portion of the pandemic. We have the trauma, the triggered historic trauma of the video of George Floyd's murder. And now we have the rebuilding that so many cities around the country have to do after all the destruction that's happened in the last couple of weeks. And so we're facing all of these things at the same time. But one of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic has given us is a language around this, right? We've got this pandemic, and Conan, we've been talking about violence as a public health. Every time we have a shooting, or every time we have an incident, somebody gets on TV and says, this is a public health crisis. And I agree with that, but we haven't really started to employ on any large scale public health solutions to it yet. The pandemic has given us the language of testing so that we know who's impacted, right? So that we know who's impacted by this thing. That it's given us the language of treatment, so that once we identify who's impacted, we have to do something to figure out how to intervene and help them help them heal from this ailment. And it's given us the language of contact tracing to say, who else might you have touched with this, right? And the interesting thing that a bunch of epidemiologists and people smarter than me have figured out is that violence acts like an epidemic. Violence does act like a public health crisis, in that in the same way as you can predict the case of the flu by having been around someone with the case of the flu, the best predictor of an incident of violence is a preceding incident of violence. And so when we think about like employing exactly what you just described, this public health lens to this, it creates a whole new, it opens a set of doors and a whole new toolbox for us. Because if we start identifying, that testing to say who's been impacted by violence, who's most likely to be touched by the ailments of violence in our communities, to treat it and say, how do we intervene? Whether that's, the mental health, whether that's, supportive resources, whether that's peer-to-peer counseling, how do we intervene to help kind of break that cycle? And who have they been in touch with? Like, how do we do the contact tracing to help identify, isolate, and slow this pandemic? That to me seems to be the smartest toolkit. It's working in cities around the country. That's what we're on the starting lines of implementing here in St. Paul, and that seems a lot more effective and frankly a lot more research based than just saying, "Oh, we don't feel safe, so we're going to put another billions of dollars into police, prosecutors, and prisons."
This week and a half that we've just experienced doesn't just pass away as so many things in our culture do. We have such a short attention span, and we tend to move from crisis to crisis or whatever's trending. And we don't want this situation to be something that trended for a couple of weeks and then went away without there being lasting change. Are you optimistic? I would like to be optimistic that because this does feel different. I was too young in 1968 to experience that upheaval. This does feel, in my lifetime, 57 years, it's the biggest thing that I've witnessed. And my hope is that it's lasting. Do you feel this could be lasting, that if we keep doing the work, that people will stay focused and this could lead us to a better place?
I am hopeful about that. And I'll tell you, one of the amazing things that I've learned is just to bet on the human spirit, and that every time something just horrifically ugly happens in community, we see like this beautiful human spirit show up. And so in St. Paul and in many of the other cities around the country where we've seen, just massive, heartbreaking levels of destruction, and Conan, I want to be really clear, and I think you've spoken to this already. There are sort of two things. There were the protesters, right? And by protesters, I mean the people who, just are heartbroken by George Floyd's loss, just feel it's unjust, and that he should still be alive today. The people who feel like these four officers must be held accountable in the court, all four of them, not just the one, and feel like we just have this like soul-searching, deep work to do as a country to stop this cycle from happening over and over again. So there's the protesters, but then there's also like the rioters, the people who showed up to break a window and to light a building on fire and to just create destruction in community. And so when I'm talking about that kind of that violence and destruction that we saw those rioters who clearly could not have been driven by just a sense of a need for more justice and fairness, while stripping our neighbors of their ability to make a living, or our senior citizens of their ability to go to the corner and get their life-saving medicine from their pharmacy in the middle of a pandemic. All that to say is, when the sun came up the next morning, it came up on neighbors just coming out of the woodworks with shovels and brooms and bags and trash cans. We were sitting on our block, and all of a sudden some music came out of nowhere, and we looked up to say, where's that coming from? And an army of neighbors walked up the street just cleaning up. I mean, it looked like a scene from like the Cat in the Hat, right? Like just neighbors coming out of the woodwork to clean up and volunteering for each other. Don't even know each other, just volunteering for each other. We had a business, we did a supply drive last Saturday, a business here whose windows are still boarded up, who instead of cleaning up their own business on Saturday, opened up their parking lot and were collecting formula and diapers and canned foods, and families were coming to bring stuff and families were coming to take stuff. And it was just this kind of massive sense of community. I did a walk down one of our main streets that was impacted earlier this week, last week, and was looking at businesses who were boarded up, and passed two businesses that were boarded up, and somebody came out and said, Mayor. And I said, yes. He said, I just want you to know, from 2 to 6 p.m. today, we're feeding community members free lunch. And so if you know anybody who needs food, tell them to come by and get their food here. And there are no shortage of those stories where people are just taking care of each other. The business owner whose building was literally burned to the ground. And she stopped me to say, my business was burned to the ground. I said, I know, and I'm really sorry. We're going to help you rebuild. And she said, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I have time to help right now. I want to help fundraise for other businesses. And I'll tell you, that's the energy that really touches me. And when we look at combining that energy with the energy of kind of the young people and the people all over our country who are out in the streets, I think we'll find that's the same energy that created this country. It's the same energy that ended slavery and that established civil rights. And it's the same energy that I think is going to carry us through to the next chapter.
On a slightly lighter note, I want to point out your mother is the chair of the County Board of Commissioners.
Yes.
So the way the government's set up, and this really makes me smile, for you to get anything done or approved as mayor, and a very influential mayor, you have to go to your mom.
Well, and not exactly, just because Conan, when I like get in trouble and when I do stuff that like people don't like, they still go and get my mom. Should we bring her into the conversation? So I have a city council that I work with. And we are the county seat of Ramsey County. So so we work very closely with the county board. I don't go to them to request a direct approval of my budgets or anything like that. I go to our city council, but we do work together very closely. I'm actually really proud of the work that she's done, even in this space. She's led the process since I think 2005 they started, of an initiative here called Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, which started off just saying, look, we're locking up too many young people. We had at a time where we would go through our juvenile detention centers and it was so packed that there would be cots in the hallways because it'd be beyond capacity. And they started investing money. They started with $1 million investments into alternatives to detention and just figuring out, can we create evening reporting centers? Can we send young people home on supervised release? Like, what are all the different things that we can do instead of bringing young people into the juvenile justice system? It's so important because this is an incredible fact, but research shows that that controlling for other factors, a young person who has spent a night in juvenile detention is actually more likely to be an adult offender. Like, our system is actually making them more likely to be offenders in the future, not less likely. That should be a gut check moment for us. All that to say is, they have, through this Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, we have reduced average daily intake of young people in our community by, I think, over 80%. They have shut down entire wings of that same juvenile detention center. Just last year, we closed a place called Boys Totem Town, which is like a secure confinement facility for young people in our community. And we've done all of those things, Conan, without seeing any corresponding increase in juvenile crime in our community. And it goes to show that we've way overutilized detention, we've way overutilized confinement. And so we're excited for the chance to work together on kind of pushing this vision forward.
Well, I have to say, what an impressive family you come from. Your mom, your dad, obviously yourself. You guys give me a lot of hope. I know that everybody has to do the work now. I had a conversation with W. Kamau Bell last week, and we talked about it's about the work, and it's about doing the work, and that's not just you. That's not just people in the Black community. It's everybody, especially everybody. Everybody has to do the work. But you give me a lot of hope. You and your very impressive family give me a lot of hope. And there's a lot of ways that I don't know what it's like to be you, but what I do know is I do know what it's like to have a 3-month-old, and you have my sympathy.
I appreciate it. She's great. Kidding aside, she's fantastic 24 hours a day. And I appreciate your compliments of our family. I didn't get a chance to tell you about my sisters and my brother-in-laws and my niece who just graduated from high school, and my wife who's a midwife, whose birthday it is today. So
happy birthday. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll tell her you said so.
I'm sure that'll mean the world to her.
It will. It absolutely will. So yeah, we're surrounded by a group of good folks, and between our staff and the city workers and, the police and firefighters who just served our city with distinction through these past couple of weeks, I feel really blessed to be around just a pretty incredible crew of folks.
Yeah, well, continued good luck to you in everything that you're doing. And if things get too rough with the 3-month-old, I'll say it again. You come stay at my place until things
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you could just text me the directions, I'll be there.
What you do is you tell the wife, I've got some business I have to do.
That's right.
I'll be gone. I'll be gone until she's about 4 years old, and then I'll come back.
Right. Oh, it'll just be a few months. I'll be right back.
I've got some things. Yeah. And then, hey, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to meeting you in person sometime. That would be very cool.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. And I appreciate the way you're using your platform to elevate other voices and those stories that haven't necessarily been told. It's really powerful and it means a lot.
Well, it means a lot to me. It's selfishly, I'm learning a lot, and it's been a blessing and a joy for me. So thank you very much, Mayor Carter, and continued success to you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care. That was great. That was fantastic.
Yeah?
Yeah, we're done. That was good. That was
awesome.
That was long. We did a lot. So we'll see what we can get. We're going to have to compress some of it for TBS, but then all of it can go online, which is how 99% of people see it. So
nice.
Yeah, that was really terrific.
That's pretty sweet. I appreciate that. Like I said, I mean, it's really enormous for us. I mean, because these are stories that people have been, I mean, these are stories that my great grandparents were telling, but nobody was listening and nobody was giving them a microphone, Right. And I mean, so I appreciate you kind of opening that up.
No. This is how to get there, I hope. Wherever there is, it'll never be perfect, but I'm hoping, but we can do a lot better than what we do. So
yeah, we definitely can.
Be well today, all right?
I heard you were planning on coming and doing a live remote from St. Paul. Can I help you set that up?
If we do a live remote from St. Paul, I'll do it. There hasn't been, because of COVID, no one's been getting on a plane. That's been the big issue for us. But I'd love to come to St. Paul if we can figure it out. And a safe way to do it, and it'd be nice to meet. It'd be nice to talk.
I'd love that too. When we open stuff back up, there's other people on this call. It's being recorded, so that's, I think, as good as a binding contract in some countries. And so
you'd be shocked at how slippery I am. I am a slippery.
Right.
You can, I say anything, and then I just disappear for years at a time. No, I really would. It would be an honor to meet you and to grab a meal, and then if we can figure out a good piece to do with it, that would be fantastic.
All right, that'd be amazing. I'd definitely be down for that. So I appreciate it. When you're ready, I'm ready.
All right. If you can handle me in person, it's a lot to take in.
I'm told I am as well. So we'll see what happens.
I'm told I resemble a very tall Belgian woman. So just be ready for that.
I have never been told that.
Hey, thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of the day.
You too.
All right. Bye.